One simple way to make your English literature essays sound more sophisticated is by improving your signposting. A lot of students write things like, at the beginning of the play, Shakespeare presents Macbeth as a fearful character. Now, it isn't wrong, but it's quite generic. The examiner knows you're talking about the beginning, but you're not showing exactly where this moment happens or where it becomes obvious. Instead, try to connect your point to a specific event or turning point in the text. For example, after the witches reveal their supernatural prophecies to Macbeth, Shakespeare begins to reveal his internal conflict as he struggles with the growing ambition and fear about his own thoughts. It's much stronger because you're showing the examiner that you understand the structure of the play. You know exactly what moment triggers Macbeth's change and why it's an important moment. And you can do this throughout your essays. Instead of saying towards the end of the play, Macbeth becomes increasingly violent, you could say after Macbeth's murder of Duncan and his increasing dependence on the witch's prophecies, Shakespeare presents him as a tyrannical ruler who's been consumed by violence. You see the difference. You're no longer just describing generally where something happens. You're showing the journey of the character and explaining specific moments where Shakespeare develops them throughout the play. So when you're writing your essays, avoid vague phrases like at the beginning, as it develops. Instead, ask yourself, what exact moment in the text am I referring to? And why is that important? That small change can make your analysis much more precise and push you towards the higher bands. Another really important skill in GCSE English is analysis. The key skill is being able to look at a quotation and explain how the writer creates meaning. For example, in Macbeth, Shakespeare describes him as brave Macbeth. A short quote, but you could analyze so much here. You could look at the language. The adjective brave presents him as heroic and respected. You could look at the structure. It happens early in the play. So Shakespeare establishes Macbeth as a noble character before showing his tragic downfall. And you could even look at the form. On stage, the description comes from another respected soldier, the captain, which makes Macbeth seem even more impressive and reputable to the audience at this point. Or in Romeo and Juliet, Romeo says, "It is the east and Juliet is the sun." Looking at the language, the metaphor compares Juliet to something powerful, bright, and life giving. Structurally, this happens during the balcony scene, when Romeo and Juliet's love becomes much more intense, private, and they begin to plan their marriage. And looking at the form, on stage, the characters are together, they're both there, but they're physically separated. So that reflects both their emotional closeness and the physical barriers between them. So, this is what strong analysis does. It doesn't just say what the quote means, it explains how the writers create effects through the different methods that they use. If you develop this skill, practice it, you'll improve in both language and literature. On the other hand, many students already have good analysis, but they stop too early. They explain the quote, they identify techniques, they discuss meanings, but they don't clearly link it back to the question. And that final step is needed for a top band answer. For example, imagine the question is about Macbeth's fears. A student might write, Macbeth describes his crown as fruitless. The adjective fruitless suggests something lifeless and unable to produce anything. This shows Macbeth feels that his crown is not secure. Now, that's good analysis, but the problem is it doesn't fully answer the question yet. You need to keep bringing your point back to the question, Macbeth's fears. So a stronger answer would be Macbeth describes his crown as fruitless. The adjective fruitless suggests something lifeless and unable to produce anything. This reveals Macbeth's fears about his legacy and lineage. Although he's gained power, his crown will not create a lasting dynasty. Notice the difference? The analysis is exactly the same, but the second answer links back to the focus of the question. So, a simple way to improve your essays is after every piece of analysis, ask yourself, what does this show about the question I'm answering? So, you don't just explain the quote, you explain why it matters in relation to the question. And that's how you turn your good analysis into grade 8 and 9 analysis. The last thing I want to stress is that the examiner cannot read your mind. If you want top marks in English literature, you need to be very specific. One mistake I see students make is that they have a good idea, but they don't fully explain it. They assume the examiner will understand what they mean, but your job is to make every part of your argument obvious. A simple way to improve your analysis is always think about what, how, why. Let's look at Macbeth. A student might write, Macbeth feels incredible guilt for what he has done. Now, we understand what they mean, but it's actually quite vague. What has Macbeth done? A stronger answer would be Macbeth feels incredible guilt for the regicide he has committed, the murder of King Duncan, which was considered one of the most serious crimes in Jacobean society. Now your point is much clearer because you've explained exactly what he is guilty of and why it matters. But you can go even further. You might write, Shakespeare presents Macbeth's guilt after the regicide to show the psychological consequences of unchecked ambition and treachery. That's good analysis. But to go further, next, ask yourself, so what? Why does Shakespeare present it in this way? Now you can link it to context. This reflects Jacobean beliefs surrounding the divine right of kings, where the monarch was seen as chosen by God. Therefore, disrupting this natural order through regicide not only damages society, but also destroys the individual who committed the crime. Now the examiner can clearly see what Macbeth has done, how Shakespeare presents it, and why he may have presented it in this way. So, whenever you make a comment, ask yourself, have I explained exactly what I mean, how it's shown, and why it matters? Don't leave the examiner to connect the dots for you. Now, if you want my resource on exactly how to craft a grade 9 literature essay, analyzing the question, planning your argument, writing introductions, building analytical paragraphs, and understanding exactly where and how marks are awarded, it's available in the link in my description for just £4.50.